So
Yeah.
talking to somebody the other day because I worked a little too hard the week before, and I was like, I'm just recovering because I don't
Hmm.
I don't have the capacity to hustle the way maybe some people do. And he said, well, it's possible that
Hmm.
nobody does, but they just don't realize how stressed they are because we don't ever slow down.
Ooh, yeah, really true. One thing that you're making me think about is how my wife and I were having this really good discussion the other day, and we were talking about like how we shouldn't be speaking in absolutes, you
Um,
know, being like this is definitely going to happen because like, you know, that's really tough. Like reality is so it's just built on change. Things are changing all the time. But what we came to realize at the end of the conversation was that we can try our best not to speak in absolutes, but we can't demand perfection from each other. I think that that's just like another thing that's going to continue adding tension to the relationship because ultimately I can try my best, right? But it's a learning process. We have to be able to embrace our mistakes as learning moments and not punish ourselves, but still continue trying, you know, to live the best life that we can live and sort of grow in the direction that we know we can grow. But ultimately it's a slippery slope because if you start demanding perfection from your partner, then that's going to create a whole, you know, a bunch of friction between the two of you.
big breakdowns. So let's talk about craving a little bit because, I know what you're talking about, but I think that in terms of our cultural reference to craving, we probably just think about craving, food or something.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go deeper into that philosophy and see how we can maybe notice craving in our own life and how we can maybe even work with it.
Yeah, when I think about craving, I think about it from the perspective of the Buddhist teachings. So, craving as the fundamental creator of attachments. When you sort of crave a particular thing, there's so much energy there where it then creates a mental attachment towards it. And through that process, this is where you're creating struggle, where you're creating tension, where you're creating misery and dissatisfaction in the mind. And I think these attachments are really everywhere. And especially with all of the heavier emotions, they're based on craving. If you examine fear, if you examine anger, if you examine, you know, jealousy, there's like a craving there that, you know, even with fear, there's like a craving for protection or to be away from that. And, and it's really a fundamental sort of creator of like all tension and attachment and all these things that cause trouble in our minds.
Mhm. And when you talk about attachment, because there's two sides of it. As human beings, we're wired for attachment, right? And if we
Hmm.
don't get that, we know that developmentally there's an impact. But we're talking about something different when we speak about attachment from this perspective. So maybe
Yeah, and
into that.
I think it's really interesting. I was talking to Dan Siegel, who's like a really big um, therapist. Well, he's a therapist, but he's also just big in the world of psychology in the United States. And I was talking to him about, you know, attachment theory versus the understanding of attachment from the Buddhist perspective because he's well grounded in both areas. And he was like, yeah, they're just like starkly different. You know, it's tough. And I think a lot of people, when I talk about attachment, I like talking about it from this perspective because obviously I greatly respect psychology, but I think there's a value in understanding that this idea of attachment has been grounded in the Buddhist teaching for like 2,600 years. You know, it's so old. So yes, this new idea of attachment theory, it's wonderful. It's helping so many people. Very, you know, that's fantastic. But let's also not be, you know, we can't just let Western ideas of how things work become hegemonic, especially when, you know, so many Westerners are in control of social media and we're the ones who are like putting content out there. I think it's also important to just respect it, you know, that attachment has been defined in a particular way for such a very long time and it's very useful. But I've been thinking about relationships in particular from this idea of attachment, and it's true, we do get naturally attached to each other. It's just a common thing that human beings do because we're wired from the beginning, we're wired with craving, and craving immediately leads to attachment. And some attachments are less troublesome than others. But ultimately, what I try to talk about is that instead of attachment, when you start undoing your patterns, undoing your conditioning, and letting go of all these heavier things, when you're in love with someone or when you have a beautiful friendship or a good relationship with family members, what you're actually kind of aiming towards is having real connection with them, is to be able to profoundly meet them, without there being so much of what we were talking about earlier, all these projections, all these, this is what I want you to do. And as opposed to feeling this thing of craving and wanting, it's more like, I feel profoundly connected to this person, and we're both in our power, we're both not harming each other, and we're both sort of doing our best to meet each other in the middle. And I think having relationships based on connection, it's just a different way of seeing things. And I think, as a writer, I have my right to create my own world. So like when I try to understand relationships, I try to see them through the space of connection and voluntary commitments as opposed to attachments and
Mhm.
expectations.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that that's beautiful. I think it's something that we often don't understand fully, and how much
Mhm.
freedom and how much bliss is actually available to us when we do stop with the entanglements, and we stop with the attachments, and we stop with the demands, and we start to just say, can I love you as you are? And my
Yeah.
my husband and I were having a chat the other day because something came up between us, and there was some way he was being that I was like, I can't handle this. I need you to shift this. Um, and while there was like validity to my request, there was also work for me in slowing down again and really saying, okay, can I be patient with this? Like, this is his
Mhm.
learning, and I can't make demands. And he just looked at me and said, can you just love me as I am?
Mm.
It's a really good reminder, like, right, that's what we're doing here. We're here to love each other as we are. And sometimes that looks like just appreciating somebody for where they're at in their path, rather than thinking of all of the ways that they need to change, and also doing that for ourselves, really recognizing that.
Yeah, no, I think that's so good because we have to allow for complexity a little bit, not necessarily making these particular topics complex, but just allowing for the fact that there are a lot of different perspectives that we have to take into account. Like, this is where you are, which is totally valid. This is where he is, which is totally valid. And just allow for everything to, I love the idea of mutual understanding because it's through mutual understanding. Like, I'm going to try my best to listen to you selflessly, completely, so that I'm not, it's fine for me to take care of myself and defend myself. There's nothing wrong with that. But in the moment of actually listening, I want to try my best to just hear you and meet you, and vice versa. And through that mutual understanding, that's where you can get your new voluntary commitments. Like, that's where you can start building, like, how are we going to tackle this moving forward? Like, how, what can I do to better support your happiness? Like, yes, you have to create your own happiness, but how can I support you?
Yeah.
And yeah, then you get real harmony.
Hmm. Yeah, I worked with a spiritual teacher in like transpersonal psychology and Jungian work, and Tibetan Buddhism for about 4.5 years in these little group therapy containers. And
Mm,
we used to do this meditation called the forgiveness meditation. And it was
mm,
essentially a dyad where we're holding space for one another, and one person is embodying someone who we have unfinished business with, and then we're just sharing our anger and our sadness and our fear, and then we're taking all of our projections back, so we're seeing ourselves in them.
oh, cool. Yeah.
And then at the end, we just hold space, we close our eyes, and we just meditate, and we hold that person in our mind's eye, and we just see them as innocent. And
Mm,
for some people, I can only see this person as 1% innocent, and for some of us it completely dissolves because we just see that person as a child. And I love this concept of, that we're all innocent at the core.
mhm, mhm.
I know that you have some visions and some dreams for us to come more into harmony, and I've heard you use the word global peace. And
Yes,
I
yes.
think that perspective of innocence really ties into that, because
Mhm.
we don't see each other as innocent, and we're always looking to blame rather than get curious and understand, why are you that way?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Wow, that's such a good thing to think about, innocence there. But yeah, I think that this is basically why I decided to start writing as Young Pueblo. And like, like my name's Diego. Young Pueblo literally means young people, and it's a way for me to understand the world and like understand and write through this lens that humanity as a whole can become so much more mature, so much more grown up. And the most like common example I use, which I like using over and over, is that when you think back to when you were in kindergarten and you were first being taught by your teachers, like, what were they trying to teach you? Just the most basic things, clean up after yourself, tell the truth, don't hit each other, and generally be kind to one another. but we may be able to do these things as individuals, but as a humanity, we're terrible at these things. We don't know how to do these things at all. So there's so much room for us to grow up, and so much room for us to, really, I don't know, come into our own in a way where I think individual transformation is going to be the big shift. And it doesn't mean that everybody has to be perfect. Doesn't mean everybody has to be Jesus and the Buddha and all of that. Not at all. But I think it does require us to get ourselves to a point in our personal work where we deeply understand that harming another is harming oneself, right? If I harm you, I'm actually in the process of that, I'm immediately harming myself, because to be able to harm you, I have to generate so much intensity in my mind that immediately gets embedded and encoded in my mind, and I will, that will be with me until it's undone. And that is, I don't know, it's such an important thing to understand, because then more people will see that it's literally to my benefit to not harm you. And when more and more people see that, then it's going to cause a radical transformation in our world.
Absolutely. It's this radical responsibility that we mainly aren't taught. And it's kind of a core, I think that is one of the core philosophies of Buddhism, even if they don't call it that, is because it's all about understanding and owning your own mind and seeing everything outside as the illusion, and recognizing that it's all self-generated. And I think the reason that we have so much anger and so much revenge and so much violence is because all of us are rejecting that inside of ourselves.
Yeah.
It's all just like energy being thrown around constantly. So what would it be like if we all just slowed down and we're like, wow, I'm feeling very intensely,
Yeah, I love that point, because I always think back to how, and this is one thing that's become really clear when I'm meditating, is that ultimately it's my perception that's creating my reaction. Even if someone does something terrible to you, right? Well, if you think about just the mechanics of the mind and how the mind works, that thing that's happening outside of you, which is granted maybe a horrible thing that someone has done to you, that is still being perceived through your mind, and then that reaction occurs, and then it's that reaction that's creating further conditioning. It's further sort of putting the mind into a certain place, or will create trauma, or will create all these sort of future difficulties. But taking back your power, I think that's a big part of reclaiming your power, is just understanding that ultimately my perception is my own, and my reactions are my own, and let me see what I need to do to be able to kind of make my mind a real home, so that it can, be safe for me to exist. Because we're not going to like eradicate all difficulties, right? Like there are still going to be, things that are quite challenging and tough about life, but being able to engage with those tough moments in a way where we're not perceiving them as the end of the world, or we're not perceiving them in a way that's causing such intense reactions, it's going to make for, much more mental well-being.
Yeah, once we start realizing that other people's actions and words and behaviors are due to their own perception and their own wounds, not us, that's what frees us to respond differently. Because if I receive everything that someone says to me, or the way that they behave, as a meaning that there's something wrong with me, or that I didn't do something right, or that I'm not lovable, then my reaction is going to be so much stronger than if I'm able to sort of step back as a witness and just see the person. Okay, well, they're hurting, and they're responding from their own perception. And that doesn't mean that I need to save them, doesn't mean that I need to fix them, doesn't even mean that I need to be in their space at all. I can and remove myself, but can I also do so without bringing in anger and hate and revenge? Can I do so from a loving, self-loving place?
Yeah, I think it's so important to understand in these situations that you can defend yourself, right? You can make sure that you have what you need, that you're able to give at whatever rate that you can give. And if you feel like this isn't really working for you anymore, or this situation isn't, fulfilling, or it's burning you out, then it's fine to pull away. I think it's really important to understand this idea of like self-preservation, because when you are able to nourish yourself and take care of yourself well, then you're going to be just, like the basic idea, you're going to be much more present for other people, much more capable of loving them, and be a better member of your community.
Yeah, Absolutely. It's really the attaching to the story that hurts us. That's what my teacher always used to bring us back to, is even when I would go and do sessions with him one-on-one, or do with my husband and I would do a couple session, we never told the story of what was going on because he didn't care. He's like, I don't care about the story. I care about the pattern, and I care about what your mind is doing. And that takes a lot of work and practice too, because we're so wired to feed the story, because the story is what helps us feel safe and make sense of what we're feeling.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of charting unknown territory when we start this healing work, and we decide that we don't want to buy into the story anymore. But then we don't have anything. We just have to be with ourselves. And that's pretty hard.
It's so true. You reminded me. So I meditate twice a day, and I'm realizing that what I'm doing there is that I'm not spending time delving into these stories. What I'm trying to do is do my best to observe reality as it is, right? I'm trying to observe the reality that's happening in my body. And when you're able to feel what's happening clearly, and you feel like the changing nature of reality that's happening so quickly, um, it creates so much space in the mind so that all these stories that have been hardened over time, they just start melting away. You start being able to pierce through them and see more clearly. And that heaviness that you were once carrying, like, all these dense stories, they lose their power and they start burning away. And you're able to come out of it with a sense of clarity that is just much more based in what's real, as opposed to, and that's why these ideas like everything's always changing, like everything arises and passes away. I think it's so essential to our happiness to be able to embrace this idea of impermanence, because if you're fighting change, then life is going to be tough.
Absolutely. So when you started this, just thinking back, like if somebody's watching this and they're like, yeah, I resonate with all of this, but what do I do? This is always the question, right? Because we're all being. So what do I do when I'm feeling anxious and I don't want to drink, and I don't want to, go and have sex with somebody who isn't healthy for me? I don't want to go shopping.
Mm-hmm.
What do I do now?
My advice to people is that, especially when you're at the very beginning, I recommend the radical honesty piece. Just embrace what's actually happening inside of you, explore that, find out where it's going to take you. And the other end is that I really advise finding some sort of technique. Like, I think people are in such different places. Their sort of point of entry to this whole like internal landscape is very different depending on your own personal history. So like some people have experienced very severe traumas, other people less so. And depending on where you are, there's still a tool out there for you. I think that's what's one of the special things about the time that we live in right now, is that the world is totally globalized, and we live in a time where all of these amazing tools from the East, from the West, like there's so many things available for people to grow as individuals, that it's not about, can I find something? It's more so about, what is it that's going to meet me where I'm at? And what I advise people is that find a tool, find something that is not only challenging to you, but it's not overwhelming. You really want to find that sweet spot. You want to find something that, yes, it's a little bit difficult because you're getting to know yourself, but it's not so overwhelming, or it's not bringing so many things up that you just want to stop the process and you don't want to do it. So you do want to challenge yourself, because in that you're going to be able to build a home of peace inside of yourself. But you need tools, because you're really like a builder. You're constructing something inside of yourself, and to be able to construct something great, something safe, something that you can really live in, you're going to need a really good tool. So that's always my primary advice to people, is go explore. Go like find a good therapist, or try different meditation techniques, or try different healing modalities. Just go out there and have that period where you're just trying different things, and then once you find something that really meets you where you're at and is really connecting with you well, dig into it and master it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like breath work is an amazing tool for some people. There is all these different modalities of meditation. I created an inner child meditation recently that's free, that you can download on Rising Woman. And it's literally just the process that I have put myself through so many times when I was feeling really overwhelmed with my big feelings, and I wanted to really be with them. And there's the plant medicine path, and then there's the Buddhist teachings, and there's just so many different ways. And I think you're right that it is individual, and it does depend on where you're at. And somatic experiencing therapy has been amazing for me, which is literally patterning the nervous system so that we
Mm-hmm.
can actually take in more of this information and let it really move into our bodies, into our cells. So I love that recommendation to just go out and experience the world and feel into what's right for you.
Yeah, I think it's critical because we all have different, very different conditioning, and I think that's one thing that we need to appreciate, especially within our own friend groups, because there's always like that one person who finds something that's great, and they're like, "We all got to do it. It's
Yeah.
for everybody." But it's like you get really excited in the beginning because one, it's such a like a wow experience when you realize like, wow, like I can actually heal myself. That to me is like a miracle. And then you want to spread it and, tell other people about it. And it's fine to be excited about that because it's something that's really special. But at the same time, honor the reality that what works for you may not necessarily work for somebody else, or maybe too much or too little. And, people really got to find something that meets their conditioning.
And what do you think about healing yourself? Because sometimes people don't really know what that means, or they feel like a bit stuck. This idea, I'm broken,
Mm,
I need to be fixed. But I think healing for me, and I'd love to hear what you think. My feeling around it is just healing is what's allowing me to sort of tear down any of that defensive protection or those ego mechanisms that distance me from being love, that
mm,
affect me and separate me from oneness. So
mm,
anytime I am reacting, anytime I'm defending, anytime that I'm blaming or projecting, I'm not connected anymore. I'm disconnected. I'm separate. And so
mm.
for me, healing is just simply being able to see and be seen, hear and be heard, and listen with curiosity rather than judgment. So what is it for you?
I try to define it on a similar note, but probably coming from a different direction, which I totally agree with everything you're saying. I think of it also as decreasing the tension that's happening in the mind. Like I try to keep it pretty simple because when you're actually trying to heal yourself, what you're doing is cultivating inner freedom. And what real freedom is inside of yourself is decreasing the tension that's happening in the mind. And tension is everything. We're talking about any sort of blockage or story or any form of like density that's just stopping you from feeling okay, from feeling actual inner peace. To be able to really, an inner peace, what is inner peace? It's actually just observing reality as it is in the present moment without difficulty and just taking it in, whatever it may be. To be able to cultivate this level of healing, I think it definitely requires some practice, but understanding that it can be done. Like even though we've conditioned ourselves over such a long period of time, right? Our entire lives we've been craving, reacting, and it's happening at such a fast rate. But these moments where we can actually pause, where we can actually see things a little more clearly, where we can engage with reality more deeply, they're so powerful that a lot of this unbinding work is happening rather quickly. But yeah, healing is literally just, I just think about it as decreasing the tension in the mind.
Love that. That's so, I love the way you simplify it. It's definitely succinct, and that's exactly what it is. We're just like removing ourselves from the story and just being.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love it. This conversation, I feel like you and I could probably talk forever. I love everything you have to share. I'm curious if there's anything that you would want to give as a sort of takeaway for people watching if they're starting on their path before we were to wrap up. What would you want to share with them?
Yeah, I think that the two overarching ideas, especially if people are new to their internal landscape, I would say embrace the idea of impermanence. I think that one, we don't realize how much of our difficulties are because we're either trying to keep things the same or trying to refuse a change that's happened recently, or just like, sort of like pushing against the wave of life, because life is much more like a river than anything else. Like everything is just moving and changing, and people are going to come and go, and jobs are going to look different, goals are going to change. So being able to embrace the reality of change, you're still going to, it's fine to have goals. It's fine to like, want things out of life, but to be able to do so wisely without causing yourself a bunch of tension and struggle in the process. There are ways to do that well. And the other end is what we were talking about earlier is just, find a practice. I think it's, you don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. I think a lot of people, when they go into it, they're like, oh, I'm going to, like create a bunch of I'm going to, I don't know, just like make their own thing. I think it's in the beginning, especially it's nice to just go to people who've been doing this for decades and check out what they've done, just so that you can be a little more efficient with your time. Because humans are very savvy, but at the same time, like, it's fine. Let other people support you. If they have something great, it might also benefit you. So find a technique and then get to work. Like, just consistency. Consistency is like the major piece. I think I went to a number of meditation retreats before I started meditating daily, but it's when I actually started meditating daily at home that I think the deepest parts of the work began.
Thank you for sharing that. It's really beautiful. What's the name of your book?
Inward, INWARD.
Okay, I highly recommend, for those of you watching, if you haven't already, to get his book, because I mean, I'm a writer, and when I read your work, I'm deeply moved every single time. Every single thing you write, I'm like, yes, I truly feel that you're really tapping into the deeper layers of truth, of relationship, of consciousness. And so I really thank you for that, because it's quite rare, actually, to read work that lands in such a profound way. So I really appreciate what you're doing in the world. And yeah,
thank you so much, because that means a lot coming from you, because I really appreciate everything you're doing as well. And I feel like we're definitely coming from a similar wave. So I'm excited that we're both out there.
Too, absolutely. So is there anything that you would recommend people check out in terms of your work, or any other ways to connect with you if they wanted to sort of hear more about your philosophy?
Yeah, I think one of the best ways is just to come hang out on Instagram. So at Instagram, I'm at Young Pueblo, which is YUNG_PUEBLO. And there I do a lot of writing. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook, and you can check out my book. I've done plenty of other podcasts, and I think soon I'm going to develop a series of conversations that I'm going to have with a friend that I'll be releasing probably sometime this summer. And I also have a podcast coming out in the future. So there's a bunch of stuff coming up, but yeah, mainly just come hang out on Instagram.
Awesome. And I'm going to link to that and your book and your site in the show notes here, just underneath. So this will be up in a short order, and I'm really looking forward to connecting more with you. And thanks for your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much.